The TSA was created in the wake of the 9/11 attacks with the mission to protect the nation's transportation systems. It faced many challenges, including new technology and workforce. John Pistole was administrator for TSA from 2010 to 2014. Before that, he was deputy director of the FBI. He's currently president of Anderson University. There's a new book about him called John S. Pistole, Searching for Integrity and Faith. John, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mimi. It's good to be with you.
What are some of the biggest threats that you had faced during your tenure at TSA between 2010 and 2014?
Well, yeah, thanks, Mimi, and thanks for having me on your show. So most people remember what was known as the underwear bomber, which was Christmas Day of 2009. So that's before I took over. But the threat that he posed, the 24-year-old Nigerian who was flying from Yemen through Europe to Amsterdam to Detroit on Christmas Day, was the non-metallic improvised explosive device, the IED. So he could and did go through several airport walk-through metal detectors undetected because, again, there was no metal. It's a non-metallic improvised explosive device, a bomb. And so that was the greatest threat after I got confirmed by the Senate in June of 2010, what could be done to detect and deter a putative terrorist like that. Unfortunately, we learned that the master bomb maker, Ibrahim al-Siri, had demonstrated that and worked with some other potential terrorists to use that. So that was the greatest threat.
So what did you do as a result of that? How did you address that?
Well, it proved to be pretty unpopular in the short term, but we changed the pat-down procedures to be able to detect somebody that might have an underwear bomb, and then also looked at some more opportunities for how we could do intelligence-based security screening. And so we developed out of that what we called risk-based security. And probably the best known iteration or manifestation of that was TSA PreCheck. And so for your viewers who go through TSA PreCheck, that came out of that time when we were trying to move from a one-size-fits-all construct, which TSA had been stood up with, that anybody could be a terrorist, and that's literally true, but not likely. And so we tried to move to, if we could have people share a little bit of information about themselves and sign up, enroll in a trusted traveler program, such as Customs Border Protection's Global Entry Program for international travelers. Could we have a similar program for domestic and some international travelers? And so that's what that came out of TSA PreCheck.
So tell me a little bit more about TSA PreCheck, about the management of that, the rollout of how that all kind of got implemented.
Yeah, so when I got to TSA in 2010, it was really, I mean, it was still a new agency, really eight going on 9 years old. And so one of the things we did is try to look at how we could move from that one-size-fits-all, where it was just a very challenging situation for the TSA officers and for the traveling public, frankly, that anybody might be a terrorist, so they might be treated as such. And so in looking at those opportunities, one of the questions I asked senior leadership is, can't we differentiate between folks who are more known and trusted, recognizing that there's no absolute 100% guarantee with anything. I worked with a couple of FBI agents who turned out to not be trusted people. They ended up spying for the Soviets and the Russians. And so my question was, well, why is it then that as an FBI agent, I've been able to get on a plane for 26 years with a deadly weapon? And they said, well, that's different. You're an FBI agent. And I said, well, that's my point. Can't we use that as a model for the nearly 2 million people, U.S. government employees who have security clearances, or contractors who have security clearances, and things like that, World War II veterans, and all these number of opportunities we had to change that one-size-fits-all to risk-based, intelligence-driven security.
Well, John, I wonder about train security because, obviously TSA, we're always thinking about airports and airplanes.
Yeah.
But, Europe did have attacks on trains. You had the Madrid bombing. You had that attempt on the train going to Paris.
Right.
How does TSA manage those issues?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mimi, because I don't think most people, when they think of TSA, they don't think of trains or buses or maybe subways and pipelines, like the Colonial Pipeline incident, the cyber intrusion, ransomware attack earlier this year. And so I think it's something that it's largely done in partnership with the industry. So obviously TSA is a regulatory agency that can levy fines, issue fines for those who are not in compliance with the rules and regulations that TSA promulgates. But in most of the situations, it's best done in partnership with the industry to say, how can we work with industry for them to mitigate their risks from terrorist attacks, such as Madrid you mentioned, and of course the London subway, the tube bombings in July of '05, and a bus bombing. How can we work with them to help them provide them the best standards and best practices, and try not to make it too much of an unfunded mandate, but say, look, if you want to provide these transportation services, you need to comply with at least this baseline of security.
Well, John, I wonder in the long term how TSA can become more proactive instead of reacting to an attack or an attempted attack to manage those threats before they happen.
Yeah, and the best way that I found during my 4.5 years as administrator was to make sure that we were risk-based, intelligence-driven. So I would start off every morning, as my successors have done also, with the morning intelligence briefing. So the briefing I got at the FBI every morning, when I was deputy director there and head of counterterrorism, was about all threats, all risks. I got the same briefing when I was head of TSA, when it dealt with transportation security matters globally. And so one of the things we would do is try to make informed decisions based on what the latest intelligence said. Here's what terrorists are thinking about. Here's what they're working with. And so whether it was a CIA, NSA, the Department of Defense, and all their great intel collectors, we get that information and then make informed decisions and judgments and say, okay, here's what we need to be doing. And one of the things that was so important during my time at TSA was helping professionalize the workforce. We had some great folks. I think they just needed the okay to, let's say, do things. For example, we created an Office of Professional Responsibility that was similar to the FBI. We created a TSA Academy down at Glencoe, Georgia, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, to help professionalize the workforce in a way that they could see opportunities for advancement and growth in their career, and also just in their skill sets and everything. So those are just some things we did to try to make it a much better informed and proactive agency.
Well, John, we're going to take a quick pause right here. We'll come back and we'll talk about your time at the FBI. John, 9/11 was a big shock to the FBI. You were at the Bureau, though not deputy director. What was that day like at the FBI?
Well, it was just the day that changed everything. That is what comes to mind. I was actually an inspector in the senior executive service and was in upstate New York, Albany, in Syracuse, New York, which is a resident agency out of the Albany division. I just interviewed some media folks and was getting ready to interview the chief judge of the Northern District of New York, the chief federal district court judge, when reports about a small plane hitting one of the towers, and then it turns out, well, it wasn't a small plane, it was an airliner, and then of course the second one, and so that was the day that changed everything. And for the FBI, it was really going from one of the best, if not the best, law enforcement agencies in the world to solve any crime. The FBI always gets their person. That's not literally true, but generally. And just a sense of, okay, how can we be proactive to detect and deter future terrorist attacks? And that was Director Mueller. Of course, Bob Mueller had been on the job as director for a week when 9/11 happened. And the day after, on September 12th, when he went to brief President Bush and the leadership at the White House, he started doing his briefing, and the president pretty quickly cut him off and said, well, that's all very well and good, Mr. Director, about what you know about the hijackers and all that, but what is the FBI doing to prevent the next attack? And so in that moment, that pivot point, we went from being that reactive agency to that of being a proactive, counterterrorism focused agency focusing on national security. And so Director Mueller established 10 top priorities with preventing terrorist attacks as the #1 priority.
Do you think that those changes then from being reactive to proactive have made the American public safer? Have we seen results?
Oh, I think so. There are a number of documented cases that the FBI was very proactive in, either working as an undercover or with a Joint Terrorism Task Force officer as an undercover agent or officer to identify potential threats and then to disrupt them from possible attacks, and then others where there was no undercover officer or agent, but just really good intelligence information sharing among the U.S. government and with our foreign allies to say, yes, this is a threat and here are steps we need to take, recognizing that one of the benefits of being a national security focused agency is that we didn't have to get evidence of the crime, wait till a crime has occurred and get that evidence before we could take action. We treated each and every national security investigation as an intelligence collection platform, an opportunity to gather information about the individual or the cell, whoever it might be involved. And of course, the scope of that, is it just domestic, is it international? And then to use that platform for taking actions not only by the FBI, but the U.S. intelligence and law enforcement communities writ large.
You know, John, I did want to ask you if you thought that any more changes need to happen at the FBI to address new and changing threats. You know, we have the threat of domestic white nationalism.
Right. Yeah, that's the January 6th attack on the Capitol, I think, has really put into sharp focus the challenge the FBI, Homeland Security, state and local law enforcement agencies have to identify and be proactive, as I just described with international terrorists. What can they do? And there are some questions about the authorities, responsibilities of the FBI and others in terms of what they can do regarding U.S. citizens. But the key is to keep, obviously, American people safe, including, obviously, our lawmakers and those in government positions.
You know, I wonder, in the very short time we have left, what you would recommend to current leaders of the FBI?
Well, I think Director Chris Wray is doing a great job of letting the actions of the men and women speak for themselves and the exceptional work that they do day in, day out, mostly behind the scenes, but not being in a partisan fight with those on the Hill or other places as to being a political pawn. And so that's the thing about the FBI. They have to be independent, they have to be nonpartisan, and that's exactly what Director Wray is doing in leading the FBI.
All right. Well, John, thanks so much for joining us, and thank you for your service at TSA and FBI.
Thank you, Mimi. Good to talk to you.